Hi, you two YouTubers. There'll be a shout out and a story. The story I wrote for the writing group a while ago, and I don't think I've read this one to you. But first of all, the housework. I'm smoking my little skull pipe in honour of the month and in honour of the story as well. And in it, I've got some Balkan Sobrani, a fantastic blend. Not as I remember it in the 1960s, but it's still a nice smoke. First of all, the shout out is to lowfunction 613. He's a new YouTuber. He's only got 14 followers and he's worth a lot more than that. So I put his name down in the bucket. And if you go and have a look at what he does, and if you feel like it, then please give him a sub and show him some love. Again, this story was written over 20 minutes. It's called The Bloodstained Coat. And you'll find out what it's about when I read it. As the body was taken from the theatre, the surgeon, Mr. Sinclair, addressed the ranks of observers who had gathered to watch the operations. Some were medical students, but many more were the dilettantes who were interested in anything scientific. Gentlemen, our next patient is a young factory worker who was unfortunate to get crushed between the wheels of a spinning jenny. The injuries to her leg are so severe, I will amputate above the knee. He continued, "Please be quiet as you can when the young girl is brought in." He turned to his assistants and nodded. They quickly and quietly left the room and returned with the sobbing girl and laid her on the table. The assistants tightened the strap holding her on the table, leaving the crushed leg free. Sinclair spoke to her, his voice confident and kind. "Now, my dear, keep your bowels open and trust in God, and it will be quickly over." With that, he turned to the small table beside him and placed the saw between his teeth. Taking the curved fleshing knife, turned to his work. An assistant had taken the girl's leg and held it over his arm, and held it firmly. Sinclair quickly placed his arm under the leg, so that the knife was curved under her leg. He made one quick cut. In one move, circled the leg down to the bone. As he did so, the high-pitched scream began. He dropped the knife and grabbed the saw, made 5 quick strokes, and he cut through the bone and the leg was off. The girl had mercifully fainted as he took one of the threaded needles from his coat collar and began to close the veins and the arteries. When he'd finished, he took the flaps of flesh and stitched them over the wound. The girl was starting to come round, and he stared into her eyes, seeking her forgiveness. "It's all over, my dear." As the assistants gently lifted her onto the trolley, she quietly whispered, "Thank you, sir." The porters took her to the recovery room ward. From her entry into the theatre to the time she left, 11 minutes had passed. Probably the longest 11 minutes of her life. Sinclair turned to the observers and bowed to the cheers and applause of the crowd. Sinclair said, "Gentlemen, the surgeon needs the heart of a lion, the strength of a bull, and the skill of a seamstress. With that he left the theatre and entered his dressing room, where he threw up all over the floor. Trembling, he took the decanter and poured a glass of fortified wine. He drank it in one gulp, and wiping his hands down his blood-stained and vomit-stained coat, made his way to the wards. At the time of that surgeon, Sinclair, was operating. The sign of his profession was a blood-stained coat that he wore constantly. In the collar he'd have some needles and silk threads, and he never cleaned the coat. It was a sign of his skill and of the man he was. Many of the surgeons vomited before they operated and after they operated. It was such a trying job. For surgeons, it was hell. They caused pain. They caused sometimes death in their efforts to bring life. And if it wasn't for them and for their wonderful experimentations and skills, many of us would not be alive today. As each added to the knowledge and skill, so medicine progressed, until we had anaesthetic, until we knew how to stop infection, and so we knew how to save life. Surgeons stopped wearing the blood-stained coat when they realised just what a problem it was. Sometimes they went straight from theatre into the maternity wards and delivered babies. And the majority of women died of puerperal fever. There was a man called Schmalweiss, and he worked in the local hospital. And they had something like a 40 to 50% death rate from infection and puerperal fever. Whilst the nuns, who had a hospital a bit further down the road and who had a maternity ward, lost only 4% of their patients. So Schmalweiss was not a proud man. He went and spoke to the nuns and found that they were constantly washing their hands. They washed them when they came into the ward. They washed them before they touched a patient. They washed them after they'd finished with the patient, and they washed them as they moved on. And he realised that there must be some connection. So he insisted that his staff washed. He washed himself before he touched a patient and after he'd finished with them. He was laughed at. He was ridiculed by the other surgeons who continued to wear their blood-stained coats until they began to realise that his patients were living whilst theirs were dying. Seems impossible to us now that such a thing happened and such a thing continued to happen. The surgeons were very proud men. Some of them would refuse to change even though they knew that things needed to change. One of the most common operations was cutting for the stone. And John Wesley records what it was like for him to be cut for the stone. First of all, the night before the operation, they tied a cord round his penis to cut off his ability to urinate. And then they kept feeding him water until his bladder was full and the pain was intense. They didn't allow him to take the string off. They tied another string below the string that they'd tied and released the first string, which gave him a little bit of ease, but not for long. In the morning, the stone cutter came in, and Wesley was placed upon the kitchen table. His legs were placed upright so that the area between his penis and his bottom were exposed. The surgeon then passed a cannula down the penis and released the string. As he did, he passed the cannula down the penis until he could touch the stone. When he felt the stone on the end of the cannula, he pressed it against the outside of Wesley's bottom. And then he cut through into the bladder and released the string, and the urine flowed out with the stone. He then sewed up the wound, and Wesley was left to recover. And every year after his operation, he met with others who had been cut for the stone. And they held a party and exchanged notes about what their operation had been like. Can you imagine knowing what was going to happen? It was the most successful operation that was performed in those days, and some of the best stone cutters were not surgeons at all, but local people who had just developed a skill and who went round the country cutting for the stone. In Leeds, in St James's Hospital grounds, there's the Thackeray Medical Museum. And you can pay to go in and you can follow a patient around. You receive a card, and that's your patient, and on it tells you where to go, and you can see how the patient was treated. And they had different treatments if they were rich, if they were poor, if they were destitute, if they were man or woman. And then after that, you go up and see the operating theatre, and the surgeon describes what he's going to do, and the theatre closes, the curtains close before the patient's brought in, and you go round and look at various exhibits. And one of the exhibits is a film of a surgeon who learnt to operate before anaesthetic was widely used. And the speed that he operated on an amputation, the patient was asleep because there was anaesthetic, but he was very fast. And his fingers were short and stubby, and you thought, how on earth is this man going to stitch up this patient? And yet he did so, very quickly, very neatly. And at the end of the operation, he turned to the camera and made this elaborate bow. So if ever you come to England and you get a chance, go to Leeds and go to the Thackeray Medical Museum and see this man at work. I think I'm going to end there. I'm just wondering whether I've got a joke. This is a bit naughty, but I hope you'll enjoy it. There's an overweight man, and I don't know why I'm thinking of overweight men, even though I've sort of said that I've started a diet today. And he's watching TV, and a commercial comes on for a guaranteed weight loss of £10 in a week. So the guy thinking, what the hell? You know, it's only a matter of a few dollars. And he signs up. And the next morning, there's an incredible, beautiful woman standing at his door, in nothing but a pair of running shoes, and a sign about her neck reads, "If you can catch me, you can have me." As soon as he sees her, she takes off running. He tries to catch her, but is unable to. This continues for a week, after which the man has lost £10. And the next part of the plan is to lose £15 if he wants to in a week. So he agrees. After all, he's lost £10. And he signs up. And the next morning, an even more beautiful woman standing there in nothing but running shoes. And the same things happen. He attempts to and almost catches her. This week he loses £15, which is a good loss. And before he signs up, there's another program, and he's warned that he is required to sign a waiver, and is warned about the intensity of this plan. But it's a good plan, and you can lose up to £20, £25. So he thinks, well, that's worth it. So he signs the waiver and signs up. And the next morning, waiting at the door is a hulking £300 muscle man with nothing but a pair of running shoes and a raging erection. And the sign about his neck says, "If I catch you, you're mine." The man was supposed to lose £25 in a week. He actually lost 34 for some reason.